welcome to the Sci-AI Podcast. This is episode number 25. Today, once again, I have invited Rudra Sekhri. This is round 3 with him. How are you, Rudra?
Doing really well, Vivek. So nice to be back.
Fantastic. We had such a great episode last time about universe and, those kind of stuff. Today, the theme of the podcast is a little bit related to artificial intelligence and climate change. All right, let's go ahead and get started then. So, Rudra, my first question is, as you might know, GPT-3 is revolutionizing the world of artificial intelligence. Do you think that it is anywhere close to human level intelligence right now? Or will there be more iterations of it, like, GPT-4, GPT-5, newer versions will make it more stronger suit of AI?
From what I've seen online, GPT-3 is basically an artificial intelligence model, or if you would like to call it an AI network, that has, I believe, 175 billion parameters. And these 175 billion parameters allow it to have an incredible amount of knowledge as to how to write words, sentences, and even write bits of code, because that's what the model was trained off of. In terms of how comparable it is to human level intelligence, I think it's pretty scary in terms of where GPT-3 has made it up to, because previous iterations of the GPT-3 models, including GPT-1, GPT-2, they were not as intelligent as GPT-3. GPT-3 is just actually kind of scary in terms of what it's able to do. And, many philosophers, many people would say AI is going to take over the world, AI is going to do this, AI is going to do that. I personally think that AI is actually going to benefit humanity in many different ways, because it's going to free up some of that time which previously only humans had to use up in those types of activities. So whether that be writing up code, because nowadays what we've seen is that due to these engines and due to these artificial intelligence models, auto-completion for code is becoming much more easier. And now we're even seeing applications that just complete entire bits of code for you. Another example might be in writing newsletter articles. Nowadays, AI is so good that we might not even need people to actually write physical newsletter articles. And there are a bunch of YouTube videos and, pun not intended, but articles, newspaper articles that sort of try to show how crazy good AI is at replicating people's way of writing up various different things. Now, GPT-3, just for a bit of background information, is actually developed by a research organization called OpenAI. And OpenAI, funnily enough, is related to Elon Musk. So, I mean, many people would say Elon Musk, he's doing way too much already. I mean, he's just got one more thing on his plate. So that's really, really, really cool. Now, but going back to if GPT-3 is capable of replacing humans, I think it personally is. I think it's reached the point where it will be able to take over humans in terms of, or at least do just as well as humans in some areas. It still might have some work to do in other areas, but that can just be modified through more training or adding additional parameters, because as we know, OpenAI releases different models. So they released GPT-2 with various different parameters. So it went from something like a couple million, like 100,000 to a couple of million, whereas with GPT-3, it started off with a couple of million and then it moved up to 175 billion parameters. I'm not exactly sure on that. You might have to confirm what I'm saying, but I think that they can just add more parameters and then it will be good. The reason why I'm saying that more parameters would do better, would make it better, is because according to AI researchers, just adding more parameters won't cut it, because the AI model will then start to plateau in terms of its level of its intelligence improvement. So its level of improvement per parameter will sort of start to slow down, and to me, GPT-3 hasn't reached that point yet. It hasn't reached that point where its level of its improvements are slowing down. If they made like a GPT-4, then it's still going to be, it's still going to follow that linear trend. But eventually, once they maybe pass the trillions of parameters range, then it might start to plateau. But we still have to wait and see.
So yeah, you just talked about OpenAI and Elon Musk. Let me ask a connected question to it. So Elon Musk and Nick Bostrom and several other scientists like Nick Bostrom have talked about this, that we might be living in a simulation. What is your opinion whether we are living in a simulation or not?
I personally think that there is a very real possibility that we could be living in a simulation. Now, I will be very pessimistic on the whole argument that we are living in a simulation, but I also have to sort of stay neutral and sort of also be optimistic about the potential consequences if we do find out that we are living in a simulation. Now, the thing is that there's been several papers on the simulation hypothesis, as it's officially known in computer science research. And basically the whole argument is that, this entire reality, the entire universe is being simulated on some advanced civilization's computer. We don't know their intentions, but one possibility might be that they just want to see how the civilization started off before advancing through the various different Kardashev scales and eventually reaching type 3 or type 4 type 3 level civilization. And that's what they might be trying to research. They might be trying to understand how they developed as a civilization. And that could be a very real possibility. The thing is that in order to simulate reality, you need a very big computer. And you probably also need a quantum computer, because there's a lot of computations that need to be done, and ideally a quantum computer would be able to do multiple of these computations at the same time, compared to a normal computer, which you would think does multiple calculations at the same time, but it actually does one step at a time. And that's the main weakness between standard computers and quantum computers. Quantum computers are really good at multiple computations in one go. Now, in terms of the possibility of the simulation hypothesis, many people, including Neil deGrasse Tyson, have said that if this is possible, if we can create a simulation that is sufficiently accurate or is sufficiently realistic, then what's not to say that other civilizations have already done it on us? We could be in this constant loop of some civilization living in a simulation, and then a civilization living in a simulation, and so on and so forth. And that's a possibility. Again, it could be there's a series of simulations, and we just might be in one of those simulations. And the reason why we're proposing this idea that we could be living in a simulation is because of two things. One, our technology has gotten so good in the past few years that many people have started to question, whether reality itself is also a simulation. we've got VR headsets, we've got pretty much everything you can ask for that will create an extremely good immersive experience of, some random reality that doesn't exist in real life. And the possibility that we could also be living in a simulation is not something that's out of the ordinary. For example, you might have heard of the game The Sims. You probably heard of the game The Sims, and that's basically a game where you control people in a simulation. Now, what if we are in that type of simulation, except we're not being controlled, but we have our own free will? But what if that free will is also pre-programmed? Do we really have free will then? It's all of these philosophical questions then add up. And the thing is that if we answer if we answer the question, are we living in a simulation, then that might be pre-programmed into the actual code of the simulation. So the question, are we living in a simulation, just becomes redundant. I personally think we are living in a simulation because there's just a lot of evidence that stacks up, even though it's all indirect. And I shouldn't really be calling it evidence. I should just be calling it logic. But for me, it all just makes sense that we live in a simulation because, as I mentioned, our technology has gotten so good, and we've already seen instances of us creating immersive experiences, or virtual reality, and simulations in our own reality. And it doesn't seem crazy that some advanced civilization created a simulation so realistic that we perceive it as reality. There's actually a thought experiment that was done in ancient Greece by a person called Plato, and it's commonly referred to as Plato's cave. And it's very synonymous to simulations. And that is that imagine you've got three prisoners tied to chains, and they can't look sideways, but they can only look in front to see what's on a wall, and that wall is lit up by a fire or some torch. The shadows on the to the prisoners, the shadows on the wall are reality. They talk, they do actions on the wall, and they're just looking at it. Like, that's what they think is reality. They think that the shadows actually talk, they actually make their own decisions, etc. Whereas, if you set one of those prisoners free, then they would realize what true reality is. And it sort of becomes the Matrix, where, like, do we want to risk wanting to know what true reality is, even if it drives us insane? And in Plato's cave, the point which Plato made was that the prisoners would be so, they would be so shocked by what true reality actually is that they might just not believe it. And worse still, they might refuse to be a part of that reality and then just instead walk back and get themselves chained up again and just continue with their perception of reality. And that's something which might happen to humanity.
So very strong case that you're presenting with your kind of belief that we are in a simulation. The only point that I wanted to ask in this to you, Rudra, is that so there should be very strong evidence of because even till today we couldn't understand in a virtual reality environment, how would you feel something? Because if you cannot feel something, for example, I feel, we feel the senses we have and, stuff like that. So how do you consciously understand and feel something in a virtual reality environment? And if that can be done, then I'm 100% sure that we are living in a simulation. Otherwise, all these thought-provoking experiments like the Plato's cave you mentioned and all looks amazing. They sound logical, but somehow break up because of the fact that in a true reality environment, the person should be able to touch, feel, sense everything. So what do you want to talk about it?
So what I'd say to that is that with the simulation hypothesis, there's a lot of controversy around it, and certainly with your argument about senses and our senses and how we
Right.
got our senses is certainly an argument against the simulation hypothesis. However, you could also turn that into an argument that supports the simulation hypothesis. And this is just a really weird thing about the simulation
Right.
hypothesis. Anything you say about the simulation hypothesis can also be incorporated into the simulation hypothesis. What I'd say to about our senses is that, you know, when I touch something, say the laptop, which I'm using to record this with
Sure.
you, like, you know, that might be pre-programmed into the simulation, right? Like, you know, our senses might be pre-programmed into simulation, right? And all these senses, right, they're just being sent to this, you know, this bit of code which we perceive as our brain, right? And that code is then using, say, artificial intelligence to say, oh, wait, oh, this is a laptop, right? And, you know, and this artificial intelligence would, you know, make us, you know, perceive that, oh, we're actually touching a laptop, whereas in reality, we might not actually be touching the laptop. It's just that the code is saying, oh, you put your hand in such a in this position of space at this time, and therefore you are going to have this sensation, right? Same thing goes for smells, right? It's just whenever we smell something, according to science, it's just chemicals touching our nostrils in certain key spots, right? Same thing goes for taste. It's just chemicals touching our taste buds, and you could make the same argument
Right.
about that again, right? Another example of that, of like, you know, us having free will and senses and perception of reality, is with this really old pixelated game called The Game of Life. And many people have heard of this game, and essentially it's got very simple initial parameters and initial rules, but once you let it go,
Yeah.
it then becomes more and more complex, and that's why it's referred to as a zero player game, because all you need to do is hit start and then you just let it do its thing. This might also be a zero player game. The advanced civilization just might have clicked play, and we just might happen to be in this simulation. This might be a 3D version of The Game of Life, and you know, and it could also have incorporated touch, sound, smell, all that stuff, and that just all might have been embedded into the code, which is then being run by, say, a quantum computer, which is performing multiple computations in one go. That's why, like, you know, like, for example, I'm not looking at this chair here right now, which you know, or this
Right.
or the floor right now. I'm not looking at that stuff. But if I was to look at it, the code would then render that under me, and then I would be able to say, oh, that's there. And what we might perceive as reality, like, you know, oh, that this floor was always here, might not actually always be there. It's just a part of the code. And for efficiency's sake, they might unrender and then re-render the floor underneath us. We just don't know. And we don't even know the resolution of this simulation. That's another thing to consider, right? Like, if we knew the resolution of the simulation, right, how much pixelated the actual simulation is, right, then we can sort of use that as, you know, a potential stepping stone to really ask the question, are we living in a simulation? Personally, I think, you know, if it would be really interesting to see if we are living in a simulation, because funny thing is, there's actually a theory. There's a theory in astrophysics called loop quantum gravity that is trying to combine quantum mechanics and general relativity by stating that space and time are pixelated at the very smallest scales, and these pixels are represented by these little loops. Hence the name loop quantum gravity. And that would be interesting to see if that turns out to be the dominantly accepted theory in the next few decades.
My mind's blown with this, these hypotheses and evidences that you're presenting, Rudra. I'm 100% sure people who are listening to this will definitely rewind and listen to it again, like myself, because Wow, a great idea. I mean, whether or not it's 100% true, who cares? But what you've presented is just amazing. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Let's stick to the topic of then reality. So, what, according to you, is reality? Is it our mind's perception of it, that do we really exist? For example, imagine if we switch off our brains somehow, um, because only a brain can comprehend everything around it, like smell, sense, vision, etc. Then is reality still possible if the brain is not there? So, how would you define it, or how would you describe it?
Well, in simple terms, very simple terms, in fact, in just one sentence, I could say that reality still exists. Um, if we were to switch
Mm,
off our brains, right? Reality still exists. Of course, unless we're living in a simulation, then, like, who knows what the code says. But simulation hypothesis aside, I think if we were to just turn off our brains, reality would still exist because, again, like, the thing is that all the laws of physics still have to apply in the universe. And so if we switch off our brains, right, you know, I still know that this house, which I'm currently sitting in right now, is still going to exist, right? I still know that's going to be right. However, if you do introduce a simulation hypothesis, right, then it shakes things up a little because, like, as I was mentioning before, like, what happens with reality when you're in the simulation hypothesis? Because reality is then rendered based on your perception of it. And so if you switch off your brain, in other words, you die, or, like, something else happens, then, you know, is reality then rendered in front of you? It's not, because otherwise you would be seeing stuff. And, that's where a lot of the confusion occurs. Does reality still exist when you turn off your brain? Because your brain is the only one that's comprehending what you're actually seeing. And, you know, the only thing that does not exist in that particular reality when your brain is turned off is the brain's perception of that reality. Because the thing is that, once the brain stops perceiving something, then, like, it's then that perception of it is gone. And yeah, that's pretty much all that I have to say. It's not really to me,
right.
this question, it to many people it trips them up a lot, but to me it's just sort of a simple question, like,
Mm,
reality still exists, and there's a, I mean, unless you're talking about very specific cases, like, does reality exist in the simulation hypothesis? The simple answer is that if we don't live in the simulation hypothesis or something other really crazy thing like a hologram or something like that, then reality still exists.
wow. Once again, amazing, amazing answer. Right. So from uh, AI, let's move to brain. So using brain implant surgery, now people with paralysis or other serious brain issues can now convert their thoughts to text. Uh, this mind-blowing thing is closer to Neuralink that Elon Musk is building, which could be really helpful for people with Alzheimer's and other brain diseases, and have lost their memory or may lose it in future if not treated. So, what do you think then in future for humanity look like from these technological perspectives, which are related to brain implants and putting a chip in the brain, like Neuralink is proposing?
There's a lot of processes that need to go right in order for us to eventually have chips inside of our brains. The first is that you need to be able to have a robust interface that converts thoughts from the brain to a computer. And we've been able to do that. This is called a brain computer interface. We've been able to do this stuff, and
Right.
we've been doing it for the last few years, and you've been seeing many use cases of it, such as people with paralysis, such as Stephen Hawking being able to convert their thoughts
Oh,
to text, and then that text then being converted to speech or whatever other means is necessary. I think it's going to be a real game changer, because then that means that people who were once excluded from society because of these disabilities will then be able to re-enter society with, new thoughts and new ways of thinking about society. And this could potentially have a tremendous positive effect on the world. I mean, for example, if you look at Stephen Hawking, right, he got diagnosed with paralysis in his 20s, and since then he's lived till his 70s, and since then he's provided so much over those 50 years to the scientific field. If we could do the same thing for people with paralysis, like everyone with paralysis or everyone with these other forms of disabilities, then who knows what will happen to the world? So many good things will happen to the world. It's just a matter of getting the technology robust enough such that it doesn't screw up either the interface or the brain itself, and then making that technology cost effective. So making it as cheap as possible, and then being able to have this technology available to everyone, because currently only the most wealthy people have access to this technology. And many companies are trying to change this. Elon Musk is also trying to change this through Neuralink. He's trying to make these forms of technologies more affordable. And this is something which we need to see. We need to see innovation in this area. Another thing which people also want to talk about, or also are thinking of talking about, is what happens when you can have a computer communicate to a brain. Like, what happens if that happens? What happens? What happens with that? What happens if people, right, like have some form of disability and are not able to truly understand what people are saying? Like, for example, if I'm talking right now, what if there's someone out there who's viewing this video but is unfortunate enough to have one of their areas of the brain, not in a good condition, and is not able to understand what I'm trying to say? Then we could have like a computer then be able to take what I'm saying and then make it intelligible for those people. And this is called a computer to brain interface, or CBI. And this is way more difficult. This has only been accomplished in very specific scenarios, such as with ear implants or eye implants and stuff like that. But even then, it's still very, very, very limited in what it can do. If we can get like a general purpose CBI, then that could be even better, because then that means that any disability that is related to some input being misidentified in the brain, all those disabilities can then be mitigated through these CBIs. But not only that, it could also have massive benefits in virtual reality games, because you need that physical experience and you need to convince the brain that this is real. Right now with VR is that, like, you can sort of tell that it's VR, but once you've got these CBIs going in, then you can make virtual reality much more compelling in terms of how real it is. And then you could also have these CBIs and BCIs communicating, computers with the brain and the brain with the computers, such that people can actually just do whatever they want in their games or whatever, just using their brain. And this would be so fascinating to see, but I don't think we'll be seeing this in the next few decades, because it's just really hard technology to get right. And then also you have to make it more affordable, and that's just something that's not possible.
Thanks, Rudra. Just amazing stuff. So from artificial intelligence and brain, let's move on to climate change. So how can artificial intelligence then help fix the climate crisis? What are the efforts that humans have to transform or have to perform to be able to mitigate the crisis, as we still don't have a plan B for our planet? Thank God for people like Elon Musk and what ESA or NASA or Indian space agencies are doing, trying to find out life on other planets, or maybe potentially make it a habitable planet and colonize us there. But right now, it looks like we don't have any other plan if climate crisis keep going on. So, I mean, what is your opinion of how AI and technology can help fix climate crisis?
Many people consider Elon Musk a sort of like a savior for humanity. um, like many people consider Elon Musk like, oh, he's our space Jesus. He will save all of humanity through the climate crisis, and he will through his Tesla company. It's not going to work because the thing is that
Right.
with Elon Musk's Tesla company, it is doing really great stuff in making electric cars more affordable for people. But at the same time, electric cars currently have a bigger carbon footprint compared to a petrol car. In simple terms, that means that electric cars are actually requiring much more carbon emissions to make compared to a petrol car. And
You're talking
that
about the battery production, because the battery production needs more carbon emissions. Yeah.
exactly. Not necessarily the battery production, because the thing is that currently
Uh-huh.
most of our electricity comes from fossil fuels, right? Unless you are from Sweden, Vivek, you're from Sweden, and
Yes,
or
yes,
you're
yes.
from other European countries that have taken active steps to mitigate carbon emissions from electricity sources. So
Right.
Tesla, Tesla in its own in its own right won't be able to solve climate change. It's just not capable of doing that. All
Mm.
electric cars are not capable of doing that. It's not like you can just mitigate all of the transportation related emissions, because at the same time you also have to consider
Right.
that they have to mine for all the materials to make the batteries, to make the actual car itself. There's just going to be carbon emissions related to that, and it's not going to be easy to do that. Many climate
Mm.
scientists and climatologists and many lawmakers have stated that one way you can. What I'm trying to get at is that there's going to be a multi-step process, and it's going to take decades for it to occur. Tech companies such as Tesla, because Tesla classifies itself as a tech company, and various other electric car companies, it's just not going to cut it in terms of solving the climate crisis. The climate crisis is going to be a multi-step process that's probably going to take decades to solve. uh,
Mm.
Many lawmakers, many politicians, and many people in general think that the first step to solving the climate crisis is to divert our electricity supply away from fossil fuels and towards more renewable sources such as wind and solar. France was able to do that. Now they're running off like 80% nuclear power right now. So most of their electricity supply is nuclear power, and nuclear power is a great alternative to fossil fuels because it's still a constant source of power, constant source of electricity, but it's less, but it's more renewable in the sense that nuclear power does not have as big of a carbon footprint compared to carbon related sources of energy. I personally, I personally have to agree with that. Like, nuclear is a good way to go, even though many people state that nuclear power has had so many accidents. There's been so many nuclear power plant accidents compared to the amount of accidents from compared to the amount of deaths related to fossil fuel power plants. Nuclear power plants don't have as much of a impact. There's roughly only like 2 or 3 people that die per year from say nuclear, whereas there's like 2,000 people that die from fossil fuel power plants, which is an outspoken statistic that needs to be addressed. Nuclear power is still very safe compared to fossil fuel power plants. I think the statistics might be even crazy. I think it's like one person every like 10 years or something like that for nuclear power. You have to check me up on that one. but it's
Mhm.
something along those lines, and it's pretty crazy. That's the first step. The second step is to then divert all of our current technologies to electric. So instead of using gas stoves, use electric stoves. Instead of using gas ovens, use electric ovens. Because then what happens is that there's going to be less of a carbon footprint because you're using clean energy. And that clean energy has got relatively little carbon footprint compared to fossil fuels. Once that happens, then it's when you want to start to, reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Uh, Actually, you probably want to start doing that from now. You probably want to start finding ways of capturing carbon from the atmosphere and then putting it back into the soil. There's direct carbon capture, which is through like carbon capture technologies, artificial carbon capture technologies, and they're incredibly inefficient. I have to be very honest, and that is that
Mm.
artificial carbon capture technologies are very limited in what they can achieve, whereas with options such as trees or you know uh, the development of bacteria uh, that can absorb carbon from the atmosphere, that is some of the stuff which we want to invest in because currently biological means of carbon capture are much more efficient than any artificial means that we have right now. We can genetically modify some of these bacteria, such as cyanobacteria or
Mm.
trees, so that they can be more efficient, but we still have yet to see how we can actually do that and how those will actually be implemented. Because the truth is that even if we plant 1 trillion trees on the planet right now, that still won't
Mm.
be anything. That still will only capture roughly 25% of our current carbon emissions, and our carbon emissions are
Mm.
expected to get slightly higher in the next few years before they actually start to dip. And you know, we need to basically make that dip or that curve happen faster. Because if
Mm.
we don't make that curve happen faster, then we're sort of on the losing side. And ideally, we want to get that done in the next 5 years, which sounds crazy, but the truth is we had like decades to work on this. So
Right.
had we started maybe 3 decades ago, and we probably wouldn't have to go with such extreme measures right now.
Mm.
This these like carbon carbon is not carbon emissions, like carbon dioxide is only one of several factors that need to be addressed. If you recall, a couple of maybe a decade ago, people were talking about the ozone hole, which popped up in Antarctica and even the southern regions of Australia.
Mm.
We also have to make sure that we aren't affecting uh, any other factors on Earth, such as the ozone layer, such as deforestation. We have to make sure that we are doing stuff, that we are transitioning to clean energy in a orderly fashion, such that we don't destroy the ecosystem in the process, because that's just not going to be great.
So was Industrial Revolution the sole cause for how climate crisis actually started? Or is it the recent population growth, all over the world, because of which consumerism had skyrocketed and due to which more cars, more factories have sprung up, are the reasons for the climate change? Do you think that Tesla and more such initiatives like, usage of solar energy, usage of nuclear energy, uh, will help us tackle this existential crisis that we have brought on to ourselves?
I mean, it's a great question, Vivek. I think, you know, it, I mean, there's various different factors that contribute to the climate crisis, and the Industrial
Right.
Revolution was certainly one of them because it was the turning point in which we sort of decided that, hey, this coal here, it's not just black random
Correct.
stuff in the dirt. It's actual useful energy. and it's sort of stuck around since. We've basically been using coal ever since as our predominant source of energy, and it's something that needs to be properly addressed now in modern society when we have the technology to switch away from carbon. The initiatives such as Tesla, solar energy, wind energy, all these initiatives, they're certainly going to play a role in climate change, but they're not one of them is going to be the sole reason that we will mitigate the crisis. As I mentioned previously, it's going to require a multi-step process that will take decades to solve, and it will take decades to implement. So I think, I personally think that it was the Industrial Revolution that implanted the idea that we can use coal as our predominant source of energy, but at the same time, it's also due to our uh, recent population growth, which happened in the 1950s, 1960s, and even today, and also just the insane increase in consumerism. My personal
Right.
take on how we can potentially stop the climate crisis would be to not necessarily go switch towards other technologies, um, such as solar and stuff like that. That can be done later. Later, I think what we need to start doing now, and what we need to start thinking about now, is how can we reduce our current consumption of various different goods and services? Because if we can do that, then that's already like 50% of the problem solved. Because most of our carbon emissions come from the fact that we consume so much stuff. If we didn't consume as much stuff, then we wouldn't be living in this mess, right? And also just another thing, the fact that our wealth and the resulting carbon emissions are being unequally distributed throughout the world. We've got countries such as the United States, Australia, all European countries, right? They're emitting the most amount of carbon, but if you look per person, that is. But if you're looking at, say, countries such as Africa or countries such as or other third world countries, they're not really emitting as much per person because each person by themselves, they don't have that much which
Right.
they can call themselves. They don't have any possessions. They don't really buy into the idea of consumerism as we do, and more importantly, they don't buy into the average citizen doesn't buy into the idea of GDP growth. Governments do because GDP growth represents a country becoming more richer, but for the average person, right, like in those third world countries, right, you know sure they become more rich, but then they also have to maintain their own lifestyle and stuff like that, and their lifestyle is very relatively low carbon. So first world countries such as the United States, such as all these European countries, should be looking towards third world countries and asking themselves, what are some of the things that they are doing that we could also implement as well. And I think the first thing would be
Correct.
to reduce how much we are actually consuming stuff, because we are consuming a lot in modern day society. We are buying clothes from the start of this year and then chucking them out because they are deemed old fashioned. This is something that's happening in South Korea a lot lately, and it's something that needs to be addressed.
Great point. Fantastic point. Yes. And I never actually liked this idea from some of the Western countries like America and Europe, blaming Asia and the third world countries for not limiting their carbon emissions. You've rightly said that, it should be calculated more logically based on how much per person emissions are. And if you still calculate it, I mean, people in developing countries like Africa, India, and others, they still don't have per home. They don't have 3 or 4 cars, right? And so, to imagine that, and to also the fact that they're not using so much stuff like people in West are using, and because of which carbon emissions are going up. So to imagine that is really, really so hard. And I'm pretty sure, sanity will prevail, and somehow, West will stop blaming on the Asian countries for not doing enough when they have actually the ones who have actually started it. So, yeah, thank you. Great answer.
Just on the point, just quickly on the point
Sure.
of the United States and first world
Yeah.
countries blaming third world countries. I think, firstly, I think that's just a stupid argument to make because, you
Right.
know, as like, as a person from a first world country, I think, yes, we've got privileges such as the ability to have computers and other technologies which other people from other countries might not have. But at the same time, if you look at the history of each nation, right, the first countries to start emitting carbon emissions, at least from a modern day standpoint, was Britain. And then they come around. Now we come to the 21st century, and they're blaming third world countries. And
Correct. Yeah.
I think, you know, third world countries should be given the time to at least develop their
Right.
economies before they transition to uh, renewable sources. I think
Right.
yes, first world countries should not be blaming third world countries for all the climate crisis that has occurred so far. But at the same time, we should not be criticizing first world countries this harshly because,
Right.
to be fair, they have been investing a lot in climate related stuff, except for Australia. That is, Australia, to be
Mm.
honest, has I don't want to be too critical, but like the Australian government is not really that keen on climate related investments. So yeah.
Mm. Mm. Right. No, great point. And I think you're right. It should be a collaborative effort rather than imposing sanctions based on whether you're not listening to the first world countries, yeah, or whether you're not doing enough. That sort of things really, is really, really not good for all of the planet to fix it, because yeah, the first world countries can do whatever they want to do, but if the developing countries won't do as much, it won't take us too far, because it should be the whole of planet and not just some surface of the planet that should be carbon free. So yes, thank you. Great, great. We had such an amazing time on this podcast as well. Rudra, do you have any parting thoughts before we wrap up this one?
Nothing much. I just like to say thank you so much, Vivek, for having me for round three. I believe, I believe I'm one of the first guests on your podcast to
Yes,
be back on for a round three, and I think
right.
it's just an honor to be on your podcast. It would be cool to see if we could collaborate on any future projects.
Yes, absolutely. We will. You're doing a great job. You're writing books and you're doing podcasts as well. So keep doing that, Rudra. We really need, people like yourself, young people like yourself, to think about the planet, to think in the right direction and inspire many more.
Thank you so much, Vivek. Oh, it's an absolute honor to be complimented by not only you, but also various other
Right,
people. And I'd just like to
right.
say thank you to anyone who's watching this podcast. Make sure to subscribe. You need to subscribe to this podcast. It is insane. The content is insane. It's so good. Um, and kudos to you, Vivek, for having such a great podcast. It's been an honor.
Thank you, Rudra. We will definitely associate again when your time permits and our schedules will match. Thank you. You have a great day, and Happy New Year, and a Merry Christmas.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. Happy holidays to you too.
Cheers. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please support this podcast by liking, commenting, sharing it with your friends, and also subscribing to this channel. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.